And that is the minutes of everything that we did and all the reports. So the reports will be included in there. Fraternal delegates, a greeting just generally of who's there from different denominations. And then we elect a moderator. That's the main thing we do on Wednesday night. This year the moderator was the Reverend Brian DeYoung from Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And then there's a presentation of just what has come in that we're going to be dealing with for the week. So there's overtures from presbyteries. We had one overture that I'll talk about. Communications, and usually that's letters, fraternal greetings from other denominations. So maybe the PCA will send a letter if they don't send a delegate to address us. Complaints and appeals. So any who have filed those in the last year, those will be presented. We kind of just set times for convening and recess and reconvening, how we're going to conduct our business during the day. Generally speaking, we usually meet together at 8:30 in the morning, and with breaks and meals, we go to 8:30 at night. That's kind of the general docket. Assign the items to advisory and temporary committees, and that's it. So it's just kind of some housekeeping paperwork on Wednesday night. Not a lot of detail, because we start Thursday morning then with our advisory committee work. So everyone is divided out into all these different advisory committees. Most of them usually consist of about 10 people. And so for each of our standing committees, for instance, when we get down to these different reports, like the stated clerk and the trustees, there will be an advisory committee that goes and meets with those standing committees and goes over their reports before we review it on the floor of General Assembly. So advisory committee work goes on from Thursday morning through the day until Thursday afternoon about 3:35. And like I say, everyone's usually assigned to one of those committees. This year I wasn't, because I was trying to write the thing that went on the website. And so I kind of assembled that, and I was thankful that I had several editors kind of helping me with that as well. Several eyes on it before they posted it. Also, they have women's gatherings, so I was able to bring Melissa this year. So pastors and elders sometimes bring wives with them or families. So the women get together and they do a lot of different activities, prayer time, and they went into Chicago one day. And then each day we also have devotionals at 11:40, so a representative from different presbyteries is assigned to give a devotional. So about 20 minutes of a devotional and a song before our lunch break. Once we got back on Thursday afternoon, that's when the business really we jump into all the different reports. The stated clerk gives his report and what he does. Our stated clerk for the General Assembly, it's a part-time job for him. He's a full-time pastor. So in addition to being a pastor at a church in Virginia, he works about 24 hours a week on average for the General Assembly as the stated clerk. And again, that's not 24 hours every week, but usually in the spring it's busy before the General Assembly as everything's coming in and has to be compiled. He's the one that sends out all this nice information, so he's putting it all together from all the different committees. And then after General Assembly, of course, getting the minutes and everything out, there's probably a lot of work the months before and the months after, so not all during the year. He has served two 3-year terms as the stated clerk and was just reelected to his, I believe, 3rd term. And then the trustees of the OPC give their report that kind of overlook kind of the finances of the different committees and things and the work of the trustees. They always remind us every year churches can't use the OPC's employer identification number. You have to have your own. We don't want to get things mixed up there. We did elect a state clerk. The statistician gave his report. And this is where I'll refer to some of my other things here. Kind of going back to the stated clerk, he talked about he's got some staff that works at the home office with him, and he usually thanks his staff. And John Mahaffey has served as the assistant clerk working at General Assembly for 26 years. He's from our presbytery. What church is John at? Newburgh?
Newburgh.
Newburgh, Oregon. So John Mahaffey has done that for 26 years for the General Assembly. As the assistant clerk, he's the guy making sure the minutes are accurate, those types of things. And then our statistician, the reason I wanted to go back to this other report here is that Luke Brown has done that for 40 years. This was his last year, so he retired. Trustees. So the statistician report, during 2024, local churches in the OPC declined by 5, so we have 300 local congregations. Unorganized mission works increased by 5 to 41, so 41 mission works. Total membership grew by 179 persons, 0.5% to 33,566 members. So you can see where this gigantic church. Not really. But usually 1 to 2% a year on average. I mean, over the years, if you want to track growth, that the OPC has grown. Morning worship service, or morning attendance increased by almost 3%. Totally offerings, as each church does a report at the end of every year that basically gives the statistics for the year. So our stated clerk for our session, Chris Cord, he puts that report together, and it says how many communicant members you have, how many non-communicant members, how much came in your offerings, and then it does attendance, usually May and November, kind of tracking some of those numbers.
So did you say membership was down, but attendance is up?
Membership grew.
But number of churches went down.
But churches went down. The number of organized churches went down. 5 churches either dissolved or left the OPC. So sometimes churches will leave the OPC for a different denomination. Other times churches become too small that they just decide to dissolve. So there's things like that happen. But mission works, number of organized churches declined by 5, mission works increased by 5, but overall membership increased a little bit, 0.5%. And probably because I think 2 of the churches were, large churches for OPC standards that left the church. So, 20 new ministers last year. 703 professions of faith, 1,147 new members by reaffirmation of faith, 780 covenant children by baptism, and many others by membership transfer. And then one thing we did add as far as statistics went, that the advisory committee, one of the things that they recommended that we did pass was adding to those statistics that we give every year. Usually the statistics that are asked of us as far as attendance go is, what was your average Sunday school attendance in May? What was your average worship attendance in May? And then same for November, Sunday school and morning worship. But we added a question, do you have an evening service? Not how many attend, but do you have one? And that did pass. And so it's going to be just a question for the churches that will go out on this year's thing. Yes or no? So we did add that to the statistical reports.
How does that help, I think, to know?
How did what?
How does that help know when they have evening service?
I don't remember kind of the motives behind that, maybe because Ed was there too. If there were motives behind that, I know there's been reluctance in the past to include that in the statistical data, and I know there's a lot of churches that are even in the same boat we are that are renting, and maybe they can rent for the morning, but they can't for the afternoon, and so it's hard to do that. And it wasn't to, again, we try to be very bottom up, not top down, but it's, having that data out there. How many churches are doing this, activity of having morning and evening services that is recommended to do, but
the
I know there's been reluctance in including that before, and I don't know why. In previous years, the questions kind of come up. Why don't we ask? We always ask about morning attendance worship numbers. Why don't we ask about evening attendance worship numbers? And it's been kind of shot down before. So I think if I had to guess, the committee was like, we think we can at least get. Do you have a service in the evening or not out there? Just to kind of know what percentage of the OPC churches. I mean, traditionally in Reformed circles, that is common to have morning and evening services. How are we doing as the OPC? We don't even have that data. So it'd be nice to know. I mean, are half of our churches, 3/4, or and where there are issues with churches that can't because of facilities or things like that. So, but that's if I had to guess. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Because we were kidding. It's not about guilty churches, but on the other hand, we're trying to also bring to the foreground and encourage churches to think about evening service. And we're trying to get that back in as a norm.
Right.
Because it's fallen away over time.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's that encouragement, and it's kind of the initial step. Let's kind of at least get some data in the door so that, I think that would be helpful to know, what are those numbers? What do they look like and stuff? And even as we've, I presented before, it's a nice goal to get 50% of morning service back in the evening if we can, or work towards that. It's just nice goals to kind of work toward. And then we did elect a new statistician because our statistician retired after 40 years. Mike Hammonds of St. Augustine, Florida. A ruling elder there was elected, and that's a 1-year term. So every year you have to elect your statistician. And if I remember the 3-year terms for the stated clerk, and Mr. Belfield, Hank Belfield, was reelected for his 3rd term for that. Any other questions about statistics? I know that can be kind of a boring thing. It's numbers and all that stuff. It helps to determine kind of the health of the church. Where are we headed? Are we growing? Do we have mission works?
Well,
are we decreasing? Are we?
The census in general is to find out, what areas might need certain things based on population, and so I'm assuming it would work in kind of the same regard.
Yeah. And they did some of that even with when I get to home missions and stuff on how we plant churches based on where churches are at. How do we help them in different ways is being addressed too.
With the mission works, is that just like within the nation, or is that even foreign missions as well? Or is that different?
That would be different. As far as foreign missions and what we're doing on mission fields, that would be different than home missions and mission works for the OPC, because primarily we're just North American denomination. The OPC is not around the world. We do have some churches in Canada, but by and large, with our mission works, we're looking to set up indigenous churches, whether it's Japan or Asia or wherever. We want to establish churches, have them raise up their own elders and deacons, and then leave them to be their own Presbyterian, have their own churches and things. We're not importing the OPC into Africa and into, We work with the people there, and we work with other denominations to build up the church in Haiti or wherever, but seeking that they would have their own, Presbyterian church.
And whenever it mentions mission works, it's ones with an evangelist in the field already, or calling an evangelist. Correct? That's what they generally
live. Generally, it means it's an established, but a mission work may. Yeah, usually a mission work is already going to be receiving funding. I think that's the definition. So a Presbyterian may, I'm trying to think of just my own kind of experience in dealing with mission works. I think a presbytery can establish something as a mission work prior to denominational support. And that would, they can, we're looking here, we've got a Bible study started, we've got some things, we don't have an evangelist in place yet, we don't have that funds from Kimchi, Committee on Home Missions and Church Extension. But the presbytery might declare that a mission work, it's just not getting that denominational funding and things yet. But as far as our reports from General Assembly, those would be established works with men on the field who are receiving denominational support. Yes. Yeah.
Because I was thinking of the Cummings. They were part of another denomination, yet they were missionaries. Cal and Edie.
No, they were part of the OPC, but the OPC, the foreign missions, which we're moving into, so thank you for the segue. Foreign missions, the OPC as far as our standing committee, so we've got a committee on foreign missions, but then each presbytery has their own standing committee on foreign missions. And so the work in Japan, the Standing Committee for General Assembly decided not to continue their support for the laborers in Japan, but other presbyteries took that up. So the Cummings were actually still OPC missionaries sent from the Presbytery of New Jersey and Puerto Rico in their service to Japan. And the Presbytery of the Dakotas, Murray Yakamoto, I believe, was from the Dakotas, and there's another Presbytery, I'm probably missing Ohio or somewhere, that kind of support the Japan mission works from the OPC. So presbyteries are allowed to do that too. It doesn't have to wait to, the denomination and the denomination's funding, but presbyteries can plant churches, they can send missionaries. Local congregations can work to plant churches and then work together with their Presbyterian leaders. Foreign missions. They talked about that last year was really a lot of work and preparation for what is taking place now in 2025. We had 2 missionaries come off the field and 2 go onto the field, or are just now going onto the field. And I did list a couple of missionaries there. We do need to be careful, and I know things get recorded, but when we talk about Asia and other things, we want to be careful where there is persecution. In some of these places, we got a report on things that are going on in Ukraine, and we just know about the humanitarian efforts that have been going on and the displacement of people and just the ministry that goes on with the churches there. So we got an update with that. We also got an update from Benjamin Hopp, who is now the regional foreign missionary in Africa and Haiti. He used to be in Haiti for many years, and it became too dangerous for he and his family to live there. In fact, the mission housing where they live has kind of been overrun by the gangs and things in Haiti. And we still have missionaries there. We need to keep praying for the Delphils who are serving there, their PCA that we work together with in the country of Haiti. But Ben Hopp is now working in the continent of Africa and working with churches that we have different relationship with. So different churches in different countries in Africa, he goes and visits and tries to help. And then also we do have those who are teaching at Knox Theological Seminary in Africa, raising up local pastors in that nation as well. Foreign missions. Like I said, a couple missionaries came off the field, a couple missionaries went on the field. I think that most of that was in the continent of Africa, at least the 2 missionaries that are now serving over there. And then one missionary came from Africa, and then I think another missionary came home from Uruguay. In the continent of Asia, it's still very hard to get in there. It's still hard to work. So just continue to pray for our missionaries around the globe and the work. And that there are many fields that need new missionaries that can use men that would be willing to go, ministers to not only teach, but to help establish churches. And so be in prayer for that. Fraternal delegates, fraternal addresses, I kind of put next on the outline. And that's something that I really enjoy, is just hearing from all the different denominations that we have fellowship with. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I can probably get it really quick.
Because that statistician does a good job.
The what?
The statistician does a good job.
Yeah. Well, the report of the Committee on Ecumenicity and Interchurch Relations, which is not to their report yet, but they're the ones that deal with our relationships with other different churches. And so at different Presbyterian and Reformed churches around the world, we have kind of 3 levels of communication with different churches. Ecclesiastical fellowship, we have with 21 other churches or federations, 8 in North America and 13 are overseas. So these are things like the PCA, Presbyterian Church in America, the Bible Presbyterian Church, those kind of churches that we have kind of the closest relationship with. We also have corresponding relations with 12 other churches and federations, 2 in North America, 10 overseas. Corresponding relationship means we're kind of getting to know you, but we haven't entered into kind of a more formalized agreement that we kind of share similar backgrounds. And then ecumenical contact is just, we're getting initial contact with you and want to get to know you better. 15 other churches and federations, 3 in North America and 12 overseas. So whoever's good with math, 15, 12, and 21. Who's good with math?
48.
48. So we have some sort of relationship with 48 other denominations around the world, and 21 of those are in that closest relationship that we kind of share things where a lot of times we'll have, PCA ministers become OPC ministers and vice versa. We got similar backgrounds and things. But that always impresses me because I don't know of any other denomination that has that many ties or connections, active, connections of working with other groups and striving to get to know them than the OPC does. So I think that's a wonderful thing, that we're not just trying to be out here on our own and be like, we've got our 33,000 whatever members and we're kind of an island to ourselves, but really trying to reach out to that Reformed world and see who's out there.
That 48, those remind me the
48.
a little bit.
So it's divided in 3 different categories.
Right.
Right. So there's contact. Okay, we just found out there's a Reformed church in Zimbabwe, to make something up. So hey, we'd like to get to know you, and then we maybe send delegates to, they send us people. They come and address us. They usually give, these fraternal addresses are like a 5-minute address from that denomination. And they kind of tell us, here's what's going on in our denomination, here's what you can pray about. And then corresponding relations means we've moved beyond just a contact, and now we're getting to be friends, we kind of know each other more. And then now that we've spent time together, that
And then that third category is your faith and practice.
Right, church, we would consider those of churches of faith and practice. In North America, we have NAPARC, North American Presbyterian and Reformed churches.
How many were in that last category?
The
faith and practice one.
23. Yeah, less in North America, but around the world. Because we've got the Presbyterian Church of Japan, and all these other churches in Africa and Asia, and all over. And so we've got a committee, the Standing Committee of Ecumenicity, that keeps in contact, and they have committee members that actually go to these different assemblies. So we have our General Assembly, and we probably had maybe a dozen or so of these addresses throughout the day, or throughout the week. But these other churches, then they ask us to send people. So when the PCA meets, there'll be a representative, usually from the OPC, that goes to their General Assembly as well. So we just kind of try to intermingle a little bit.
What does Reformed mean?
Reformed is just kind of that, in a basic kind of thing. You know, the doctrine coming out of the Reformation, getting back to Scripture, getting back to, you know, Scripture alone, you know, salvation by faith alone, not by works. So those kind of basic doctrines and teachings that came out of the Reformation, those things that were proclaimed as the church was being reformed, you know, Martin Luther and Calvin and those people. Just to try and get back to the Word of God and those basic doctrines. Yeah. So that was reforming the church, getting rid of indulgences and
We're not all
works-based
Catholic.
religion, those kind of things.
Not all Catholic.
Not all
It
Catholic.
was a breakaway from the Catholic Church, mostly.
Correct. Yeah, the established church of the time. Yeah. Any other questions? We did have a special committee that was elected last year on special committee on criminal history and officer qualifications. Last year when I was on the advisory committee, I was dealing with this overture from a Presbyterian asking for this special committee. I was the chairman of that advisory committee, but they were just asking, and just to kind of condense that story a little bit, basically in one of our presbyteries there was a church that was primarily made up of ex-convicts. So the question was, how do we deal with especially more serious issues, whether it's you know, going to prison for murder, going to prison for sexual crimes, those kind of things. Can those people, you know, can they be officers in the church? How do we deal with criminal history and officer qualifications? And yes, that was a unique situation that you've got a church that's primarily made up of ex-convicts. So how do we, and they wanted to come into the OPC, so how do we deal with that? The committee just basically, it was about a 15-page report. This report's probably going to be published if it's not already on the website. Special committee reports are listed, you know, usually under the General Assembly tab on the OPC website. But they reminded the Assembly of the statement that was adopted last year that really leaves that final jurisdiction on the ordaining of officers to the local session. So the local session is the ones that have the authority to determine whether or not someone has the qualifications, whether they meet those qualifications to be an ordained officer in the church, to be an elder, to be a deacon. But generally speaking, I mean, they highlighted portions of the report, and I don't have all of that here. But generally speaking, you know, they talked about, you know, there are some sins that are more heinous than others, and there are sins that have lasting repercussions, you know, societally and other things like that. It's hard to be an elder if you can't be an elder to everyone in your church, if you have restrictions around people that you can be around and things like that. And so sessions would have to take great care and great wisdom in how they would ordain people to these offices. But really this report was rather brief for a special committee report, and it was just general advice, but just saying, in a lot of cases it's probably not going to be recommended in certain cases where people could, they can still be involved in a church and be a member, a good standing of a congregation, and serve in many ways. But there are limits to serving as an elder and deacon, and some of these things may be those types of situations.
I just checked, the report is online right now.
It is online. That report is online right now, so if you're really excited to read 15 pages of special committee reports, jump right into that.
There's also a really good podcast on the prison ministry that we have.
Okay.
So there's tons of dudes that were saved previously and been saved in the prison system and are getting out of the system, and they had a big congregation of these dudes. So that's kind of where this stemmed from.
Right.
There's a really good podcast on it where they interview the pastor that's kind of
Okay.
running that prison ministry.
Running that group. Okay.
And it's just like some rock solid dudes that come out of there. That's where it's like, who leads this group of dudes, you know, if they're all together.
Right. Yeah. So, and I I'm sure Timothy can get the details on the podcast for us if we
Yeah,
need them. If anyone wants that.
It's the OPC rolling out their podcast.
Okay.
I can shoot it out if anybody wants it.
Okay, perfect. Trying to look at my time. Committee on Christian Education was the next report. Part of the highlight of that was their modern English study version that was in the making for the last couple of years. Committee on Christian Education is what puts out all of that literature, much of the literature on the back table, not all of it. But those little booklets that the OPC puts out, Christian Ed puts those out. They also do the New Horizons magazine each month that comes in the mail. They also do online teaching as well. They do educational classes. The Ministerial Training Institute for elders and pastors can go take different classes. They also work together. The OPC and the PCA work together with Great Commissions publication that does a lot of Sunday school material. And it's the 50th anniversary of that joint venture between the OPC and the PCA. So basically half of the board of Great Commission's publication is officers on our standing committee or people on our standing committee of the OPC, and then half from the PCA. Regarding, as far as something kind of new was this modern English study version. We had a committee several years back that was looking at whether or not we should update our Confession of Faith and catechisms, the language of it, because as you know, this was written in the 1600s. So the English in the 1600s and some of the these and thous and the archaic language, they were looking into that, looking at making modest changes, okay, updating the language, not updating the meaning of that. And so we had a special committee that worked for, I want to say, 3 years. They may have extended that, I don't remember, but a couple of years ago, they presented their report and the work they did, and then that report was put before us. There's really kind of back and forth on whether or not that wants to be, people want that adopted as our secondary standards or not formally. And there's a lot of resistance to that, so we turned it over 2 years ago to the Committee on Christian Education to kind of polish work of this other committee and turn it into a modern English study version that can be used by the churches. And so that's what they came up this year. In 2028, so in 3 years, there is going to be not an order of the day, but something on the docket, something already scheduled on the docket that we voted on a couple years ago, where that question is going to come back, whether or not we want to change the secondary standards to this modern English, but they wanted churches to have 3 years to kind of look at it and work with it. Right now it's kind of like we've got tools. So we've got our standards that are already here and printed, and then we've got tools that individuals can use, pastors can use. So those are going to be published. Those may already be on the website. I'll have my website person look that up. That could already be on the website now, whether or not the modern English study version is up there. But also we did what? And this is a lengthy report. They didn't even include that. So my printed version does not include the modern English study version with all the appendices and line by line parallel columns of what they changed and didn't change from the original. That was another 150 pages. So I chose to read that online rather than print that out myself. But it is lengthy, but they're also going to put it into a written form. That was a recommendation that kind of came to us. Any churches that wanted it could request printed copies, and they would print copies up to us, so that basically that we would send the modern English study version to all those churches and federations that we talked about earlier, and then also we would prepare a printed version to be made available to all ministers and sessions in the OPC who request a copy. So it can be online or
Modern English Study version is available online.
it is available online, so you can find that too.
Standards
All-
and confessions and catechisms.
150 pages of the Modern English Study Version.
We're not gonna
And that was just Thursday at General Assembly. So,
Which is just a half a day.
yeah, which is just a half a day. So Friday, finished the report on Christian Ed. Then we went to Home Missions and Church Extension. So that deals with planting churches, but also Home Missions has been working on revitalizing churches as well. Churches that might be struggling, churches that just need some help and encouragement, coming alongside them. So they're working on doing that. This is also the oldest standing committee of the OPC, was established at the First General Assembly on June 12th, 1936. So Home Missions was the first established committee. So kind of looking at some growth here. At the end of 2024, the denomination had 305 established congregations, 36 mission works. In 2022, 9% of congregations were mission works. In 2023, 10.6% of congregations were mission works. And in 2024, 12% of congregations were mission works. So there's a growth that's happening, that we're planning more churches in the OPC. And this committee supports, in the last year, 6 new, 24 continuing, and 12 regional home missionaries, 2 church planting interns, 5 special evangelistic projects. So there's a lot of resources that the denomination is putting out into that. They help support those regional home missionaries. We have one in our presbytery as well. A couple of folks spoke on their works, places that they're working in church planting. Revitalization, I already mentioned that. Some of the new changes, part of the problem with planting a lot of new churches doesn't mean you have a lot of new money. It takes money to plant churches, right? So sometimes churches need help and encouragement, and even this congregation had support from our denomination as they were being established as a mission work and becoming self-supporting. So some changes that had to be made regarding new church works going into 2026 and beyond are some just basically, otherwise the funds will run out. All of our standing committees usually have some reserve balances, but they're eating through a lot of that reserve money trying to plant churches and support people. So some of the new criteria for new mission works are they shall normally have at least 20 committed adults and $20,000 in reserve funds prior to applying for field support from the committee. So they want to have some established base before they invest money. Not every church plant, survives or gets to become a self-supporting church. The second thing was support schedules will be linked to cost of living. So it may cost a lot more, or it does cost a lot more to plant a church in Hawaii than it does in Iowa. I mean, just those kind of things. So they're going to look at, what does it cost to support a minister and support a congregation in these different areas to kind of help them better. And then the third thing, financial support from the denominational committee will be set up at 200% of support from within the presbytery up to those maximum levels that decrease every month. And so, for instance, just to use simple dollars, if a presbytery is supporting a mission work at $1,000 a month, then the denomination will support that at $1,000 a month. So it'll kind of match those funds.
It should be noted it was 10 families or $10,000.
10 families?
10 families.
Okay.
Was the prior criteria.
Okay.
And also $10,000.
And also $10,000.
They bumped it because of how many regional missionaries we now have in the field and how many more are coming in that they want to bring in, but we're really struggling financially. And then the cost that it costs to have the regional missionaries or Presbyterian. There's a big cost of that.
Right.
But they're seeing benefit from it. So they're trying to figure out also the dollars and cents.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it does cost money.
We're planning more churches, and that's good. And the committees are not afraid to use the reserve funds. That's what they're for. But they also don't want to, have this great flurry of activity for a couple of years and then be like, you're all on your own now, and we don't have any money to help you and support you. So they're really just looking for ways to have that longevity and how they're planning churches and how they're getting that out.
And this church had support both Presbyterian and denominational for what, 7 to 8 years?
Yeah. So yeah, it takes a long time to get a church established and to get things going, and it takes a lot of involvement. So whether it's foreign missions, which are important, right? We want churches planted around the globe, but also, we know our culture in this country, and we want more churches planted. We want the gospel to go into all these communities, and so it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort. So the Committee on Coordination, basically when we do, like in the fall, we do the thank offering. The thank offering basically goes to these three: Committee on Foreign Missions, Committee on Christian Education, and the Committee on Home Missions and Church Extension. So those three committees get the funding that comes from the thank offering and get funding that comes from people giving to those works. Some of these other committees, they'll put out numbers and things about requests that they have. $15 per communicant member they request, or $20 per communicant member, those types of things. The Committee on Coordination, what they do is they work with all the different committees. So now we've got a problem. We're planning a lot of churches right now in the United States, in North America, and right now we're lacking on missionaries for the foreign mission field. So they've got funds and they've got reserves, but we're eating through a lot of these. So they kind of coordinate between the general secretaries of these committees on percentages, how much of the money goes to these different committees, and they all work together. So they're not rivaling each other or competing for funds, but they're working together for the good of the church, but they're also trying to help each other out. So the Committee on Coordination works with them. They also work with these other committees as well. They have representatives from diaconal ministries, ministerial care, ecumenicity, and other committees that they work together with. So they kind of handle the funds, the Committee on Coordination. They work on the combined budget for worldwide outreach committees. Those are those three committees. They do a proposed budget each year for those three committees. The proposed budget for the next year is $5,789,000 for giving over those three kind of committees. The report on diaconal ministries talks about service at the denominational level. If you are familiar at all with the storm report that goes out, that's either a short-term, I won't get the acronym right, but basically helping when there's disaster relief and also short-term missions. So there's a lot of work that goes on if there's flooding, if there's hurricanes. And we've got local congregations that we can help, or local congregations that we can assist. Maybe they don't have help to their members, but we can help in their community. They released a video that I think will be online, if it's not already online. I think that might be coming a little bit later. The video they released from the hurricane damage in the Carolinas, and just the work that they were doing with the people there in those communities, rebuilding homes, and just they've got a whole slate of volunteers that will go in different regions. So they have people set up in different regions. So if there's a catastrophe here in the Northwest, they have resources and people they can send to our area or somewhere else just to help people in need. So they do a lot of that, and then also work with presbyteries, diaconal committees as well. Committee on Ministerial Care, relatively recent committee in the last 10 years or so. John Fickert heads up that committee. He's the director of it. That really helps, does a lot of work with ministers, setting up sabbaticals. They have grants for getaways for ministers, things like that. OPC pension plan, they work with that. Mrs. Annika Fesco serves as a care coordinator for ministers' wives. She heads up all the activities for the ladies at General Assembly as well.
And she does a great job.
And she does a great job. Yeah, she does. Sabbatical grants and retreat grants to ministers. Yeah, and they do a really good job of looking out for ministers in the church. Committee on Ecumenicity and Interchurch Relations. I've already kind of shared a little bit about that. That's our relationships with all these different denominations, and I already brought it up earlier because of those fraternal addresses that happen all throughout the assembly. They brought up a recommendation that we delayed until we got to our overture, and their recommendation was erecting a special committee to study the power of presbyteries to dissolve congregations. Is there ever a situation where a presbytery could decide to dissolve a congregation without the session or the church's approval? So that came out of this committee, and we went, whoa, there's an overture coming that wants to do some revisions to our Book of Church Orders, so we waited on that. And then we dealt with that with Overture 1. Historian, still got some time. Historian is Camden Busey. So there's a report from our historian. The two things that they're working on right now is we're 11 years out from the 100th anniversary in 2036. So they are working for OPC 100, working on getting that together. So you have a report from the historian and a report from the committee on the historian. These are brief reports, but they are also looking at releasing 2 books, an anthology of OPC history and a second edition of History for a Pilgrim People. So those are 2 things that they're going to be releasing. Every year they do a memorial video of ministers that passed away in the last year that they show to the assembly as well. And they'll also be working on doing some history videos. We saw a snippet of one of their history videos going back to some of our foreign missionaries in the early days, and a missionary that was kidnapped and murdered. They talked about that they're putting together, I think, for the 100th anniversary. And then we kind of got into appeals and complaints. We had 4 judicial appeals and 3 complaints on appeal at this assembly, so kind of a moderate amount of things. But you'll notice that we got into that by Friday evening, and that took us all the way through Saturday and into Monday. So a lot of the main reports are done, Thursday and Friday and into Saturday, and then we kind of bog down a little bit. We slow down to deal with these appeals and complaints. And those are things, concerns that come up from individuals and congregations that go to a presbytery, that come to the General Assembly, and then we deal with each of these issues one by one and kind of work our way through them. And the way those are set up, we have a standing committee that takes on these appeals and complaints. They basically go through the material, review it with the people involved, make sure that they're properly before us. They've kind of followed the procedures to get here. And then we have an advisory committee that meets with people as well. They hear some of the evidence and things. And then they make recommendations. So they might come before us and say, when we get to, here's the procedure, we're going to give each side so many minutes to present their case and then questions, and then we'll debate on whether or not we should sustain this or deny it. And then the advisory committee will say, when we vote on this, we advise you to do this or that. Sometimes we agree with that committee, and other times we don't. And things kind of go back and forth as we go through these different issues. So, any other things? We're kind of running out of time, so I'm thinking about maybe taking up those next week to get into some of the details without the details. But just some of that procedure so you kind of know what's going on. But I think that might be enough for this Sunday to kind of wrap up that portion. But does anyone have any questions so far on that? And not that I want to belabor it, but I do want to kind of finish this, and then we'll jump into the fourth commandment as well. So if we finish early next week, we'll hit the fourth commandment as well. But I do want to kind of not just go, yeah, we had that week and now it's gone, and be moving on. So.
I think it's important for some there too, that the General Assembly, Presbyterian, these are all men that are just serving in their local congregation. There's nobody special at the General Assembly. They're all from your local churches.
Correct.
That helps to preserve the greater good of the church and oversee, like you say, from the bottom up, not the top down. There's no, even if you're serving on those committees, serving as clerk or whatever, it's still a side thing that you're volunteering for away from your local congregation.
Right.
These are not special offices of anything.
Right. For those, and especially with ruling elders, if you have ruling elders that, are working jobs and things, it might be a lot difficult for them to get away and to be able to serve and spend a whole week doing that. But yeah, both Ed and I had to be elected. I guess I wasn't elected, I was kind of the default. But usually, for ministers, the way our presbytery works is you state your availability. You say, I'm available to serve that week at next year's General Assembly. And we get into our September meeting, then they'll elect out of how many ministers say they're willing to go. They'll elect up to our number, which I think is 4. They'll elect 4 ministers to go. And the same with ruling elders, but they have to be nominated by their session. So like if our session wanted to send somebody, we would nominate them, and then they would be voted on at our Presbyterian, and they would serve in those roles. Like I said, the stated clerk, he's a pastor of a church, full-time pastor of a church. So all these men, our moderator, he's a pastor of a church. Sometimes it's a ruling elder, sometimes it's a pastor.
So since it's all volunteer, I shouldn't call you and tell you to get the heck out of Chicago.
Well, you can text me, so, yeah.
It's good advice.
Get out.
You can text me and tell me to get out of Chicago, yes. Next year it's not Chicago, though. Next year it is in, and that was on the last page, but in Pennsylvania, so, at Geneva College, so, outside of Pittsburgh.
Our GA is larger on the East Coast than like this last year when it was in Seattle.
They're always the same size.
But really going to be more people that would show up.
No, the only, sometimes there are presbyteries that don't fill their slate of commissioners. So maybe you can't get 3 or 4 ruling elders from your presbytery to go because you don't have that many guys that have the time to do it. Or you don't have enough ministers that volunteer. But usually most churches fill their slates of people. So usually it's always about the same size no matter where we meet. Because the General Assembly operating fund kind of that people donate to funds the work of the General Assembly. So like we're housed on a campus, so we sleep in dorm rooms, and so room and board is covered for the commissioner. Me bringing my wife, then I have to pay for that, pay whatever the college fees are for room and board and things like that. Yeah, but it's usually the same size. So, any other questions for this week? And we'll kind of pick it up and kind of wrap up next week. So, but some of those reports are online if you're really anxious for them. All right, let's pray together. Father, once again, we thank you for the church, the bride of Christ. Thank you for the work that was done at our recent General Assembly, and pray that you would continue to be with Laborers for Home Missions, that more and more churches could be planted in communities all around this country, and that more and more churches could be planted around our world, that the gospel would go forward, that you would be glorified. And we thank you for this opportunity as we get to worship in just a little bit here. We pray that you would prepare our hearts for that as well, in Jesus' name.